Over the past few years, noticeable changes in the city's boundaries between land and water have become more frequent and more widespread. That's why Mayor Walsh has consolidated plans to manage rising sea levels in several areas, from East Boston and Charlestown to the North End waterfront, South Boston and Dorchester. To tell us about the vision for a resilient Boston harbor is the mayor's Chief of Environment, Energy and Open Space, as well as Commissioner of Parks and Recreation, Christopher Cook. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you, Chris.
First thing I want to start with here, which is, I think, the new thing, is how urgent. This is more than just wet soccer fields.
No, this is important, although we do have that as well. We have to prepare for sea level rise. This isn't something that we can think about in some far off future. When we saw those storms back this past January and March, we actually saw inundation in South Boston, we saw inundation in Dorchester, we saw inundation in East Boston. And we didn't have major wave action. So as we look over the next 5-10 years, we have to start moving and do concrete steps to make sure we're prepared for sea level rise.
What also occurs to me is this is going on at the same time as the cities are desperately trying to build enough housing for its population growth.
Right.
Isn't that a factor too?
No, it is. And so as you look at this, you have to see that, all right, so what makes this a livable city? The reason people want to live here, the reason Boston is so popular is 100% of our residents live within a 10-minute walk to a park. So as we're increasing the density to make sure that we're hitting our affordable housing goals, we have to make sure that we don't lose any of that livability of our city. And so what are we left with? Well, we could look at the shoreline, and that's a place that we can add acreage and also protect our city.
Well, one place I can think of where this is going to be a big issue, where you've got the housing that's burgeoning right now, is in South Boston, the area near Columbus Park. Explain how this plan works in that area.
That's really important. I love the fact that you still call it Columbus Park. That's great.
Moakley Park.
Yeah,
right,
Joe
exactly,
Moakley Park.
Right, exactly.
Right there at Carson Beach. And when you look at Moakley Park and Carson Beach, I mean, Moakley Park is basically at grade with Carson Beach. So in a major storm event, the waves are going to come over into the park and then go over to the Mary McCormick housing or the Ann Lynch housing or the Old Colony housing. I mean, some of our most socially vulnerable residents are in the flood path. So it really behooves us to build up that park and try to create a green space that can help protect us against the waves. We don't want to disconnect ourselves from the harbor. We want to more thoughtfully connect ourselves to the harbor. And it's important to add recreational space in these neighborhoods because the density is so intense.
What does that space do, at least once you update it? What can it do to mitigate what's going to happen?
Well, the most important thing you can have is the height, right? So that's the aspect to this, is as you approach the shoreline to try to create some berms. Now, maybe there's some other systems in there, whether it's deployable flood wall systems or some concrete retaining walls that are within those berms. But the idea is to actually create a buffer between you and the ocean. Now, this is in coastal flooding in the future, but also major storm events. The thing that's really progressive about what Mayor Walsh is doing here is we're not waiting for a major storm to actually hit us and then trying to retrofit the city. We're actually taking proactive action, try to plan before we have a major storm.
Well, I know you have some other near future things you got to do, let's say around Fort Point Channel, right?
That's right, and that has to be within the next 5 years. So we're going into a design phase hopefully later this year with Fort Point Channel. Obviously that's going to be a big community conversation, and Fort Point Channel is really interesting because it's a lot of private landholders along Fort Point Channel. But they're all interested. I mean, they understand the value of their property and the value of protecting their property. So they're going to be our partners as we try to expand that harbor walk and make sure that we have a park that not only is active and has a lot of fun recreational opportunities, but is also saving the city from flooding. Fort Point's important because what happens by 2070, the coastal flooding actually meets the Fort Point flooding, meets the Moakley Park flooding. It can actually flood the neighborhoods backwards. So this is near-term actions.
This is BNN News, and we're talking with Christopher Cook, the Mayor's Chief of Environment, Energy and Open Space. In East Boston, Chris, you've got Belle Isle Marsh, you've got a greenway that floods occasionally already, and the city's trying to do something about that, isn't it?
Yeah, we're excited about the opportunities in East Boston because as you look at South Boston, we're really talking about berming up the existing parks and adding some other acreage. In East Boston, there's an amazing natural resource, the Belle Isle Marsh and the Wood Island Marsh. There's an opportunity for a true nature-based solution in East Boston just to try to cut down that wave action. In the East Boston Greenway, we've actually taken a positive step already. We have a deployable flood wall system installed. So in case of a major storm right now, today, we could put out a deployable flood wall, and that actually protects 4,200 residents in East Boston from flooding.
Well, I know with the new development in the Seaport District, people are adapting to rising sea levels already, that keeping things off the first floor at least to keep it from being vulnerable. But what about buildings that have been around for a while? Is there anything the city has planned for them?
There is, and we're pretty excited. So not only do we have retrofit guidelines that are coming out that we've developed with the Boston Planning and Development Agency, but even our Landmarks Commission has worked with their partners in the Environment Department to figure out how to retrofit some of our existing business stock. And I will say that is a large problem for us. And I have to say that our buildings are a big problem on the mitigation side of this. I want people to know that yeah, we are preparing for climate adaptation and sea level rise, but we're also trying to reduce our carbon footprint in the city. And in order to do that, we're going to have to retrofit those existing buildings.
Now, you're dealing with global greenhouse gas emissions. So how does a city plan to reduce the emissions from here affect it that much?
Well, it's really important to make sure that we're part of that global solution. Listen, we're a harbor city. We have to prepare for the sea level rise, but we also can't continue to contribute to the problem that's creating that sea level rise. So we have a carbon neutrality goal by 2050. And in order to do that, we have to look at making sure that we have more renewables in our system, and we really have to be aggressive about electrifying our grid.
And I guess one reason that is getting more and more urgent, you've got population growth, you've got more housing units that also generate those gases, you've got more traffic, so you got to work on those, don't you?
We do, and that's why we're excited about the opportunity afforded to us by Community Choice Energy or Community Choice Aggregation. The idea that, this time 2 years from now, we may actually have a very strong renewable mix in our electric delivery.
We should mention there's a place where people can probably find this plan online, so what would you recommend for checking it out?
It's easy. It's on the front page of boston.gov, Resilient Boston Harbor.